We're past the midway point of the season, but coming out of the bye week, it's time to get into our mid-year grades.
You are Locked On Wolfpack, your daily podcast on the NC State Wolfpack. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Wolfpack Nation? It's time to get locked in with Locked On. Thanks for making Locked On Wolfpack your first listen each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Monday episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed. Head on over to FanDuel.com in order to get started. Happy Monday to all. As always, I'm Grayson Boone, joined by former Wolfpack defensive tackle Kenton Gibbs. Kenton, as previously stated, we're past the midway point of the season, but coming out of the bye week, we felt it appropriate to share our mid-season grades by position group. So we're going to start here on the offense. We'll work our way through the offense, then get into defense, special teams, and coaching later on in the episode. So starting here with the offense, we'll start with the trigger man, the overall play of the quarterbacks this year. This includes McCall and CJ Bailey. What would you give them as a grade?
Now, first thing first, I need everybody to understand this. My grades are not based upon, well, contextually, this happened or that happened. Did your teachers used to do that back in the day? No, they probably didn't. And if they did, hey, congratulations, you had nice teachers. But I grew up in the school for brainiacs called Cass Tech, and we had a saying that you would see your way out of cash, meaning if you got too many C's, you'd be gone, athletes included. So no curves being given here for, oh, there's injury or there's ups and downs. None of that nonsense. I'm going to grade you for how you're doing. Obviously, A is the best. That means that that group has been killing it, star-studded, like, hey, that's a national championship group. F is nobody needs to have their job next year. Nobody. Not a single one of these players needs to be on the field. So let's keep that in mind here. And on the quarterbacks, I would go overall C-. C- is where I'm at with the quarterbacks because, and this is not to be the dead horse or anything like that. The young man has retired from football, so this isn't trying to kick anybody while they're down. But objectively, the quarterback play that we got to start this season off was so abysmal.
Yeah.
And that extends beyond Grayson McCall because when CJ Bailey was first asked to step in there, quarterback play still wasn't good enough. You know, it was still like, and it was a moment where I say, hey, lose with the new regime, lose with the freshman. That implies that I expect him to be bad. That still doesn't mean that the grade is, oh, well, based upon my expectation for you being bad, I'm going to be not. No, absolutely not. C-, this group was underwhelming and has underperformed given the expectations upon this group this season. But even without expectations, if this was our quarterback season during a year where we're like, oh, we're probably going to stink, I'd still say C-. It could have been worse, could have been better.
Yeah, I'm rolling with a C, and you hit on a lot of the same points I was going to touch on. It's a shame that we didn't get a full season to give Grayson McCall a full season of judgment, but based on what we did get, and that was only 2 full games, it just wasn't very good. And it was such a shame to see that play out like that. And then, of course, the horrible injury, just a very sad scene for Grayson McCall. Now, CJ Bailey, although he has come in and he's played very well for a true freshman, he is still making those freshman mistakes. He's holding onto the ball for far too long. He's taking too many sacks. Some of the reads are very hit or miss, but he's getting a little bit better week by week. And that's really all you can ask of him. Back-to-back performances of 300-plus yards through the air, that's fantastic. And you just have to keep building on that. But right now, based on what we've been presented, I have quarterback play at a C. Now, Kenton, let's take a step backward into the running back room. How do you have them graded?
So the running back room, instead of a C-, gets a C+. There have been times of lacklusterness. Hollywood Smothers' injury didn't help. Yeah. You know, Jordan Waters having an ailment that disallowed him to go to Cal didn't help. But this group has been up and down and all around. They've been all over the place. They've had games where they're like, man, they look so good. They're, you know, the running backs are moving and grooving. And then there have been other games where it's like, we can't be effective regardless of what we do with these backs. So I'm going to say a C-. C on the nose, not a C-, C on the nose.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm also at a C. And I think a lot of that is also because of the very encouraging signs you've seen from Hollywood Smothers and him kind of having a surgence into the lineup, him getting a lot more touches. You're seeing the immediate benefits as soon as last game out at Cal. And hopefully that's the case moving forward as well. But when Hollywood Smothers is on the field, he's one of the best players on it at any given time. And so the more that he gets the ball, I think the overall grade could obviously rise. Kendrick Raphael's had a couple good moments. He's had a couple good touchdown runs. He's also had some fumbles, some kind of lackluster readings of defenses. And it's just kind of, it's kind of all over the place in the middle. So, and then of course you have Jordan Waters. What looked like a good finish to game one was the last time he got into the end zone as a runner instead of a pass catch. It's just been disappointing. And Jordan Waters has not quite been the guy that you expected him to be here at NC State. And overall, it's just kind of led to a very average grade here. So again, I'm also sitting there at a C. Now let's stick right there up front. We'll go with the offensive line next, Kenton. What do you got?
D+. They get a D+ because not only to me, inconsistency gets you a C. Inconsistency gets you a C. And I know some people are going to say this grade is much too harsh because when they have been good, they have been very good. The problem is when they've been bad, it has been god awful.
Yeah.
It has been so bad. It has been just tough to watch at times because to see that we couldn't get pushed to move Western Carolina, I believe it was a 4th and 1 against Western Carolina that we got stuffed on, where I was just like, what is happening? Am I in bizarro world? And even if you were to say, well, Ken, that was game one and they've gotten better since then, have they? Have they? How many? Grayson specifically talked about multiple times on there. How many times do we have to see a big run and then call back for holding? We talk about C.J. Bailey holding the ball for too long. You know what I think is super interesting about that? Because I'm not going to disagree and say he doesn't have moments where he burps the baby a little bit. Absolutely. But you know what I think is most interesting there? If you look at most of his sack forced fumbles, right? You had one against Syracuse, one against Clemson. I think there was another one somewhere in there, but I can't remember where the other one was. Both of those two, the defender got there in less than 3.5 seconds.
And he was blindsided.
I'm sorry, blindsided for both. And actually, I believe the defenders got there in under 3 seconds. 3 seconds is about your standard. That's what I was always taught is like, hey, if you can't get there in 3 seconds, the quarterback's probably going to get rid of it. 1,000, 2, 1,003. That ball's probably out. Now, if we're seeing that, and this guy's getting sacked with a 1,000, 2, 1,003, if we're seeing you get sacked before that, generally, especially if it's not a blitz where there's a free rusher, generally that's on the offensive line. So anyway, I don't want people to take this as the offensive line is so bad that, like, again, nobody's had their job next year, but some important positions, if guys were coming back, I'd be like, hey, you got to reevaluate that. And it's so sad because the guys who are doing it wrong offset guys who are having spectacular years. Because I think Jacarius Peak has been phenomenal this year. I really do. I think he's been very good this year. I think Zeke Corral has been who you expected him to be for the most part. Like, not a very powerful guy that was just going to be this road grader, but a position blocker that was going to get in guys' way for long enough to make something happen for the most part. So, we've talked about Big Belt and how he's looked all year, but this group as a whole, I think, just has underwhelmed.
Yeah, you just mentioned the two names I was going to highlight, Zeke Corral and Jacarius Peak. Those two guys are doing some massive water pulling because otherwise I think this group would be somewhere in the D's for me. I have them at a C-. It's just been extremely inconsistent, like all over the place. Pass blocking has been their best attribute, and even that at times has been shoddy, but that's been far better than their run blocking. The run blocking, a lot of times, we've talked about it so many times actually on here, you'll have 3 or 4 guys doing it right, but when one guy does it so freaking wrong, it ruins the whole entire play. And we've had countless examples of that over the course of 8 games. And so when that is what you repeatedly put on tape, that becomes your identity. You're inconsistent. You're unable to execute at a high level. That is what you are. So for me, overall, I think they would be somewhere in the D's, but because of Zeke Corral and because of Jacarius Peak, 2 guys that repeatedly rate highly in the PFF ratings, they're pulling up my grade, but I have them at a C-. And to cap off our offensive grades here, the pass catchers, that includes wide receivers and Justin Jolie at tight end. Kenton, what do you got?
B+. I got him at a B+. The only thing that will raise them up to an A is those NFL catches, right? Those moments where it's like, man, that's right on you. You got to do it. They have had some moments where things haven't been perfect. You know, like it's been a couple bad drops from KC and whatnot every now and then and all that. Or not even a couple. I remember the one drop in particular where I'm like, that's a tough drop and all that. But by and large, this group has performed at about the level I've expected. There's not a single game that I look back and I watch the tape and I'm like, oh, these boys are getting cooked. They just can't get separation. They couldn't buy their way open. I have not seen that at all this year. So with that in mind, I look at this team and I say to myself, well, if the wide receivers and pass catchers are always open, and when they're not open, they're separating vertically like a Justin Jolie, I've got to give them a positive grade. And again, if they were truly like, hey, every time one of them touches the ball, they could be gone, I would be more in that A territory. But again, as a unit, I'd say B+.
I'm actually going A- here. I think they've exceeded my own expectations, and they were pretty high to start the season. But when you have guys like Wesley Grimes, who doesn't get targeted as much as he should, but produces every time that he is targeted, I think you can throw Noah Rodgers in that conversation. I know he technically fumbled at Cal. It was not a fumble, but it is what it is. He's been great when he's been targeted, which is not nearly as much as it should be. Everyone knows how the two of us feel about Justin Jolie. We've been pounding the table for weeks. Please get this man more targets, because every time he is targeted, he delivers. He has been outstanding. Probably, well, I don't know if it's much of a conversation, to be honest with you, the best offensive player we've had all season long. And that includes KC. I mean, I'd say the misusage of KC has really dragged him down a bit. Honestly, the whole offense a bit. I think a lot of the schemes and the personnel changes and the overall play calling, it's just left so much on the table. So I honestly think that this group could be even higher than an A- if they were afforded the opportunity. But I think they've been excellent. And then, of course, you also have the younger guys. Terrell Anderson's looked awesome so far. Keenan Jackson has looked awesome so far. There's so much talent in this group, and you just hope that they will repeatedly get chance after chance after chance to prove themselves in these last 4 weeks. I would be shocked if they didn't deliver when they were afforded the opportunity. They are that talented.
I bought Keenan Jackson stock early, and I've been living like a fat cat off it. I've been living high off the hog off that Keenan Jackson stock. I remember when he flipped, I said, he looks like, of all the receivers I've watched, he looks like the best pure receiver of the group. And lo and behold.
You can go back and find the clip. I remember Kenton saying it. It was right around National Signing Day last year. It's on clip. Kenton is saying it, and he's still standing by it now. That take is aging very well, I'd have to say. Coming up next, we're going to flip sides and get into the defensive grades after a quick word from our sponsors. Our first Monday sponsor is FanDuel. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 back in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the very same page that you're placing all of your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com in order to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com in order to get started. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Middle portion of our Monday show, now working into the defense of our post-bye week midterm grades. Let's start up front, just like we did on offense. We're going to start with the defensive line, Kenton. What kind of grade do you have with them so far?
I struggled between a B and a B+. I really did. I struggled a lot with this. I'm going to say B+, because upon further review of the tape, I'm like, there are so many plays where I'm just like, what more do you want these three to do? You know, like don't get me wrong, they have not been perfect, okay? And what kept me away from an A- for this group, what kept me away from an A- for this group is that it may be unfortunate, it may be unfair. There have been times in three-man pass rush situations where we just gave quarterbacks all day and tomorrow to find guys who were running open. And again, it's not necessarily fair. It's just it's not a glitch. It's not a they're bad. It's a feature of the situation. but they've also generated pressure out of three-man looks where it's like, what? To end the Cal game in particular, Devin Van, he said, you know what? I'm tired of playing around with these boys, man. Don't these nerds got something to go do in a lab of some sort? Exactly. Fine, I'll do it myself, as Grayson gestures the Infinity Gauntlet. But I look at that and I say to myself, B+, because there have been, even on some huge running plays, right? We showed you all, for example, the touchdown run against Wake Forest, how what more can the defensive line reestablish the line of scrimmage? Did so well. There were linebackers unblocked, and those guys just didn't seem particularly interested in making a play in that moment. So B+ for this group. The only thing that could bump them up to an A or A+ for me is dominance every time. I think at their worst, they have been good. At their best, they've been dominant, but they've been more good than dominant. So I'm going to leave them at a B+.
I have them at a B. And Dan, when you talk about being dominant, he has been dominant. And it's a shame that a lot of that gets washed away when the back end of your defense kind of struggles so much. Defensive line as a whole and a Tony Gibson defense, they just get looked over a lot. And that's because a lot of the stress is on the secondary and the play of the linebackers. But the defensive line has mostly been fine. Brandon Cleveland's been fine. I think Trevally Price is starting to come on strong, so that's a positive note. Obviously, Red Hibbler leaves the team after just a couple weeks. Very odd situation there, but it is what it is. Devin Van, though, that is the guy. To the surprise of no one, that is your guy. He's the senior captain. He's the leader of this defense, and he is playing like it, really stepping up and just playing like a man possessed. And that's exactly what this defense needs, especially in the last 4 weeks of the season. So for me, I have the defensive line at a B. Moving backward, the linebackers, Kenton. I think this can be a critical one for the both of us. What do you have?
You remember what I said an F was, Grayson? Nobody should have their job again next year. Very serious question. How many of these guys would you be comfortable that we've seen at a high clip having their job next year? You can't tell me there's a world where like that guy needs to sit down. How many?
Caden Fordham, if he's fully healthy again, I would retain him. Kamal Bonner, he's young, but he's showing some flashes. I would retain him. Outside of those two, I mean, Sean Brown's an interesting situation because it's like, do you keep him as a linebacker next year? Does he move back to being a safety? We don't know yet. You keep Sean Brown, just pure athleticism. I don't know if he stays as a linebacker, though. 2, I think. Maybe 2.
2. And at minimum, even if we're just talking 2 rotations of linebackers, that's 6.
Yeah.
1/3 of the group you're okay with keeping. Everybody else needs to lose their job is what I'm hearing. When I hear that, I don't hear F. I hear D to D-. We have shown you on tape, and Grayson and I are decent enough human beings to not show tape of certain plays that Grayson and I have watched together and said, unblocked. The offense doesn't. It's one thing, you know, when you're playing pickup basketball with somebody, you're like, he's self-checked. Yeah, we ain't got to worry about him. We're going to leave out there, you know, because you've got to put a small ball in a small rim 30 feet away, 25 feet, whatever the case may be, a lot of feet away. If I'm trusting you as my starting linebacker and the team says, I don't think we need to block him and we can run directly at him because he will miss, that's going to take you down at least a 4-letter grade just for plays like that alone. But for there to be multiple plays where guys are going unblocked and they're just like, I want to go bump titties with an offensive lineman as opposed to go and make a tackle. I'm going to go ahead and say a D-, D, and that's where I'm going to leave them.
I'm at a D+, and perhaps that's generous, but it has been bad. The play of the linebackers, it has been bad. And it's even tougher, of course, when you lose Caden Fordham, and getting ejected in the first game of the season was a little bit of a microcosm of everything that would go on the rest of the season. Obviously lost to injury, continued thoughts and prayers to his recovery. But when your green dot guy goes down for the rest of the season, when the rest of the linebacking play has been bad, it's just a total crapshoot. And so I think at linebacker specifically, we've talked about, some of the younger guys getting a lot of looks in the last 4 weeks. I think the linebacker spot might be one of the places that happens the most. And I mentioned the name Elijah Groves on here a couple times. I would love to see him in some capacity during these last 4 games of the year. Tony Gibson called this kid a monster. He's still a true freshman, obviously still a lot to learn, but just based on his metrics alone and his report coming into NC State, that seems like a kid that you want to keep around and build on. So will we see him? I'm not quite sure yet, but I say that because the linebacking play has been so poor, you got to start looking elsewhere for something else. And again, this is not personal, not trying to dog on anyone here. It's been a rough year for a lot of folks on this squad. But when we repeatedly have to bring up run fits and eye discipline and not getting baited by quarterbacks, and some mobile, some immobile quarterbacks successfully baiting you, it's just been bad. And that has been probably the largest reason the defense has struggled so much this year. And giving up 34 to Wake and 51 to Tennessee, 59 to Clemson, some of these games have just been so like almost non-competitive from a defensive aspect. And when your linebacking core struggles so much, that's the first place you look. So for me, although it may be generous, I give them a D+.
I couldn't agree more. I like you said, if a D+ is generous, some folks got to start having those hard conversations about, am I getting ready to learn enterprise? Am I like, what are we doing here? What am I doing wrong that I can do better? And another thing is, I don't think the effort has been there from, you can't replicate Peyton Wilson's speed. You can replicate his effort. You can replicate that level of effort, that level of, hey, I'm going to lay it all on the line. I'm going to lay it all on the line. I'm going to give you everything I got. And when I'm done, you're going to know that I laid it all on the line. I haven't felt like that too much this year.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because obviously coming into the season, we know that you can't replicate a Peyton Wilson because no one can. But the level of linebacking play has been so beneath even like your basement expectations. It's like, okay, there's much more going on here than we had hoped there would be. So that remains a massive issue. To finish off our defensive grades, Kenton, we're going to get into the secondary. What do you have here?
So the secondary, they've had ups, they've had downs, they've had moments where they look really good. They've had moments where I wouldn't even say really bad. I think that even their bad moments are like average. So that leads me to give this group about a B. I think that they've been, I think that they've had some bust or some moments where you're like, that's tough, or moments where we're coming up and fit. You know what? I'm going to say B-. I'm going to say B-, and that's going to be my final answer. Because I've seen moments where run fits were a little rough, tackling in the open field was a little rough, but by and large, this group has been a net positive. I would not look at this group and say, hey, this is a terrible team. Like if this was a championship level team, they might be your Achilles heel maybe, but we are not that. Therefore, they are not our Achilles heel, not even close. And even if I was saying just in general, Achilles heel on a championship team is often a B- unit. It's a B-, maybe B unit.
Yeah, we're in lockstep here. I also have a B-, and I was also going to use the phrase net positive. They have been a net positive for the defense. Looking across all the stat lines of the 8 games we played, I truly don't think there's been a game where the secondary has been completely torched through the air, that is. They haven't given up massive chunk plays through the air. They haven't been repeatedly beaten downfield outside of, I don't know, like probably less than like a handful of plays. There's really not that many to choose from. So the secondary in pass defense, they have been good. And that was an expectation coming into the season. And you've had a couple names kind of rise up to the occasion. Bishop Fitzgerald through the air has been great. DK Kaufman, although he has his moments, he's been a net positive back there. He's forced a couple turnovers. He's been a really good asset to this secondary. Aiden White's been kind of injured sometimes. He just hasn't really looked like Aiden White that we expected coming into the season. Of course, Brandon Cisse has been injured. We're hoping to get him back sooner than later. There's been a lot of turmoil in the secondary, but I think they've handled it well. My biggest concern, Kenton already touched on it, it has been the run fits and finishing tackles. They just haven't been like physical enough. And I think that's where they get some points deducted. But all told, I have them at a B-. I think they've been relatively okay. And rounding out our Monday episode, we're going to get into the grades of special teams and coaching. This comes after a quick word from our sponsors. Our second Monday sponsor is Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks, and it makes getting tickets to your favorite live events easier than ever before. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on seats, and you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. The curation of Gametime Picks makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, you name it, they got it. Toggling the all-in pricing feature on the app will show your total up front so you receive zero surprises at checkout. And as always, you get that panoramic view of your seat in the app before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect upon arrival. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And again, create an account and use redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? You already know. It's game time. Last couple minutes of our Monday show, rounding out our mid-season grading. We're going to get into the special teams first. This includes punter, kicker, punt return, kick return, all four of them all together. Kenton, what do you have?
I would say a B- for this group because there has been a lot of really good highlights, and then there's been some like, what are we doing here? You know, like Noonkester went off for that one game. What was it? Was it 398 or 298?
It was 298.
Okay, it was 298 punt yards, 8 punts, 7 of them down inside the 20, and then the next week he just kind of lays up, not a complete egg, but for Noonkester standards, you know, it was a little bit rough. Vineset rather has been kind of up and down, and you know, missed some kicks that are like, you kind of got to have those. I'd say all in all, I'd say C+, B- in that territory.
I was actually wrong. It was 398 punt yards against Northern Illinois.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. 398 punt yards. He cooked that game. Like, he legitimately, to me, that is the first time a punter has ever been legitimately in conversation for, can I give this guy ACC Player of the Week? Because there is not a single player more impactful to the game than him. With that in mind, you know, you have a moment like that, and then you go out and lay a dud after it, you know, lay a game that's, we're not expecting that every time, because that every time, that's A+ territory. And I kid you not. Like, even if the rest of the special teams is mid, just because one is carrying in that way, but, you know, there's just been too much inconsistency, not just from Noonkester, but from really all of these groups.
Yeah, Noonkester's, honestly, he struggled a little bit lately. I mentioned that Northern Illinois game. It was 8 punts for 398 yards. That is preposterous.
7 inside the 20.
7 of them were inside the 20, and the average distance was 49.8. Since then, Wake Forest, he had 3 punts. The average was just 39 yards. Not that great. Syracuse, 1 punt, 39 yards. Again, not that great. And Cal, he had 5 punts, 40.6 yards per punt. That's just not really the Noonkester that we know. And so he's definitely had his moments, but recently, I don't know. He looks like he's been struggling a little bit. So I think that certainly brings it down. Vincent is the kicker. I think all told, he's been good. I think he can be a lot better. I think he's missed, 4 kicks this year. I think he's a lot better than what he's even shown. And so, you know, I think he's just a sophomore. He'll continue to grow, of course. He's been relatively fine. He hasn't been the reason we've lost any games, which is a good thing. Also hasn't really been the reason we've won any, which sometimes that's fine. Sometimes it's a good thing. He's been okay. Now, punt return and kick return, I think that's probably a net 0. Haven't really had a whole lot of opportunities to make big differences there. The best kick return I can think of is DK Kaufman. I think that was a Northern Illinois game. He had a good return. Outside of that, really nothing much going on. So special teams as a whole, I go B-. They've been okay at times, and that's relatively it. Just fine, which sometimes that's a good thing. But But NC State in the last handful of years, their special teams has been at least like an A-. And so they've certainly regressed a little bit. I'll be interested to see how they perform here down the stretch. And finally, perhaps this is the grouping that a lot of folks have been waiting for us to touch on. Coaching. Through 8 games this season, Kenton, what is our coaching grade?
B+. I'm sorry to say this. Getting KC the ball behind the line of scrimmage that many times and it going wrong that many times, but still trying it that many times is coaching malpractice. Defensively, how you still play some of the guys in that linebacking core, the amount of snaps that you do. I am legitimately sitting here wondering, are the guys on the bench that bad? And if they are, well, I'm not saying you need to abandon the 3-3-5, but can we temporarily look at doing something different to get some of those big guys who are better on the field? Because what we're seeing is, it's just gross. it's just a little bit icky. And you know, again, I struggle to come up with anything beyond D+ because F means everybody needs to go. And I don't say that, but there are some parts that need to be completely revamped. Completely ignoring Justin Jolie at times. Tantamount to coaching malpractice. It just is, you know. So I'm going to say a D+ here.
To the surprise of probably no one, Kent and I are in lockstep yet again. I also have a D+. And coming into the season, we all knew the expectations. We all know the preseason predictions and the overall vibes around this team and the roster that had been built over the offseason. Despite bringing in so much talent, our coaching in the beginning of the year kind of warned folks to be cautious, and it's going to take a lot of time to gel. That never really made sense to me because in the offseason, you're propping up your acquisitions and saying, this is the team that's going to compete for a championship. But then the season begins, and then all of a sudden the messaging changes, and it's, you know, there's so many new faces, and it takes time to gel. It's not easy. I'm like, well, you can't have it both ways. And so I think when you consider that, you consider being 4-4 at this point in the season, you consider the repeated coaching malpractice, mainly on the offensive end, some of it defensive, but mostly offensive. And you look at where you stand here with 4 games left to play, the season is an abject failure. It just is. Yeah. And yes, they can finish 4-0 and be 8-4 and go on to win a bowl. Rah, rah, yay, yay, whatever. But like the season is a failure. Any way you cut it, any way you slice it, any way you try and sugarcoat it, the goal was to win 10 games and compete for a championship. At the end of the season, you will have done neither of those things. So it is a failure. And when it is a failure, you did something on many fronts extremely wrong. That's a D+. It's not a complete failure, although that could change over the last couple of weeks as well. But it's just been extremely disappointing. The level of play has been nowhere near what we hoped it would be. Offense, defense, at times, special teams. It's just been extremely disappointing. And so I, too, have them at a D+. We're going to have to see how they finish the season. I think there's a lot of possibility that they could win out. I mean, it's there. If they want it, I truly do think it's there. But we're going to see if they rise up to the occasion or not. That'll do it for us here on Monday. As always, thank you all so much for joining us. Be sure to hit that like button. Drop your comments in the comment box. Give us your offensive grades by position group, your defensive grades by position group, special teams, and coaching as well. Give us all of your grades. We'll also post this on Twitter. I want to get as many responses to this as we can because I am genuinely curious. Mash that subscribe button if you have not already. We'll see you right back here tomorrow for more on Tuesday. And until then, go Pack.
Go Pack.